June 2, 2019. What's in your imagination? Neal Worthington. Licensed Unity teacher and spiritual leader at Unity of Payson, Arizona.
In December of 1971, a long time ago, I took a trip that required a lot of flying. I was in the Army stationed in South Korea, and I took a little bit of leave and traveled to other parts of Asia. First I went to Thailand and spent a couple days sightseeing in the Bangkok area. Then I flew on to Jakarta, Indonesia. And there's where the planes started getting smaller as I made my way to Irian Jaya, which is former New Guinea in the country of Indonesia. Well, the last leg of that commercial flight was in a fabric-winged DC-3, similar to Amelia Earhart and that part of the world. I made it safely. And then while I was there in Irian Jaya, I took missionary aviation planes and I flew to the remote areas of Irian Jaya, hillsides where runway was kind of perched on the side of the hill, and then even where there were no runways, rivers filled with crocodiles. My job was to spot the crocodiles. I sat by the pilot. But that wasn't the most notable flight that I took on that trip. After 3 weeks in Indonesia, I returned by flying from Jakarta to Hong Kong. And I remember that flight as being a KLM 707 jet that I flew in 1971, I remember. Well, as we were approaching Hong Kong, has anybody ever flown into Hong Kong? Has anybody flown in before 1974? Oh, you know Maurice. As I flew into Hong Kong, we approached, not seeing any airport. I don't even think the pilot could see the airport. But we pointed toward, I'm going to give you a picture. We pointed toward a checkerboard on the hillside. Big red and white checkerboard. The pilot aimed for that checkerboard as we're coming in low over the city. And as we did at a certain point, that in relation to that checkerboard, the pilot banked sharply to the right and dropped in altitude very, very quickly. I like to fly, but that was a little bit surprising. So we then, after that sharp right turn, pointed toward the runway and close over, there's a picture, close over the teeming city of Hong Kong, right in the heart of Kowloon. So that airstrip, that landing strip there, is about 40% longer than Payson Airport. Oh. And it handled at that time the most cargo flights of any airport on the globe. One runway, so it was a very interesting airport. So I like to think that it was a feat of imagination for that pilot who couldn't yet see the landing strip, but only that checkerboard square on the hill, to see in advance the safe landing on that airstrip. Now, that wasn't the only feat in which imagination played a role. We did land safely. Everything was well. And there were very few accidents at that airport called Kai Tak Airport. You remember that, Maurice? Yeah. So, the other feat of imagination was this. At one point, it was untenable to continue to use Kai Tak Airport. But it's a very crowded area, very dense. Where could an airport be placed? And there was no apparent solution. So in mind, something had to happen. In imagination, something had to happen before that new modern Hong Kong airport could be created. With no place apparent there that one could see to put an airport, someone started looking at, I'm going to look because I don't remember the pronunciation, Cheklap-Kok Island. Well, Cheklap-Kok Island isn't big enough for an airport. But if it is leveled, and if an area more than twice its size is reclaimed from the seabed, an airport is possible. Something that to physical eyes was not there. I like to think, again, that it was some engineer or some architect that could see in imagination something that very much was not there. And so we have the modern Hong Kong International Airport. Still one of the busiest in the world, complete with all the amenities, hotels, restaurants, even a golf course in the complex. So, you know, seeing something that wasn't there, the physical eyes, it's the same is true for our life. What we see in our imagination becomes our reality. What do you hold in mind? Do you remember that proverb that says, as a man, this is the King James Version, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. What is in mind becomes reality. And we'll go on to say how that happens. There was a writer named James Allen from England who in 1903 wrote a book, As a Man Thinketh. Anybody know that book, As a Man Thinketh? And I want to share one thing that he said to that. He compared, nice garden emphasis today, by the way. He compared the mind or the imagination to a garden. Here's what he said. Every thought seed sown or allowed to fall into the mind and to take root there produces its own, blossoming sooner or later into act and bearing its own fruitage of opportunity and circumstance. Good thoughts bear good fruit. Bad thoughts, bad fruit. It is our mind that begins the creative process. And one of the tools we have for that creative process is imagination. You remember that if you've walked over to that rose garden as being one of the placards, one of the 12 powers of man that were stated by Charles Fillmore, not him only, but many others. And imagination is defined as the ability to imagine, of course, to conceptualize, and to envision. The ability to imagine, conceptualize, and envision. It's a power that we all have. Remember, if you've been here at Unity a little bit, we are expressions of the divine. Each one of us, each one of you, is an expression of the divine. So it is in the mind of God that the imagination created divine ideas that turned out in our expression. And the same is true for us. We are parallel to that whole process, being made in the image and likeness of God. Charles Fillmore put it this way, very succinctly. It is through the imagination that the formless takes form. He probably picked up that the power of imagination can be used to our detriment or to the detriment of someone else. That's very surely true. Scriptures speak in Romans about vain imaginations, or a better translation, futility of thought. These may be images that we play over and over again in our mind, kind of coming up from the subconscious. They just play over and over again. We're playing the same movie over and over again. Or they may be something based on fears or fantasy. And these come forth as thought that generates ideas that eventually can generate a physical or a situational expression. And we can ignore that, and sometimes that subconscious thing goes on, or we can intentionally, maliciously choose to use our imagination in a different way for our, not for our benefit or not for the benefit of someone else. So we spoke about divine ideas. Does anybody remember in unity, when we talk metaphysically, we vary a little bit from the traditional Christian Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and we have a unity Trinity. Anybody remember what that is? I'm going to give it to you right here. Mind, idea, and expression. Think first of the divine mind, from which all of creation comes. Always good, definitely unlimited, always wanting to expand and create. And from that divine mind come divine ideas. And from those divine ideas come divine expressions, including you and all that is the expression of the divine. But the same is true for you. It starts in mind. That could be thought and feeling. But in that mind and from that mind come, again, an idea. The imagination is put to work. And from that idea, an expression. We can do this consciously, or we can do it unconsciously, not caring about the result. And of course, we'll get whatever that movie is that's been playing in our mind. The author Neville puts it this way. Whoops, no. Where is Neville? I missed it. Maybe we left him out. Oh, I'll have to say it for you. By imagination, we have the power to be anything we desire to be. Through imagination, we disarm and transform the violence of the world. So as we look at that Trinity, mind, idea, expression, how do we use that rightly? We said that we can use it inappropriately. We can misuse that, but how do we use it rightly? To me, it's a 5-step process. And the process goes like this. First, we let go of a prevailing image, maybe that movie that's been playing over and over again, that is not our true desire. Then we distill that desire to what our true desire is. Third, we, in the silence, and I love, thank you, Maurice, for the way we spent that time in silence. What a productive place to be. In the silence, we imagine that desire. We imagine it not only in thought. What sense we can imagine? We can smell the roses, as you say. We imagine it with sense, and we imagine it with feeling how we feel when that we imagine is. Then we listen in that silence for inspiration. Attentive to the supporting circumstances that appear, because those supporting circumstances we're in a frequency match for the circumstances that go with what we're imagining, and those are drawn to us. So let me share one simple example from my life. If you notice how could you not notice? If you notice when you walk through the door, there's a motorcycle sitting out there. So when I was in my 20s, I rode motorcycles a little bit. Wasn't crazy about it. Eventually stopped riding and determined that it was not for me and that I didn't like motorcycle riding. Perhaps it was my prejudice in one way or another. So up until about 5 years ago, if you'd asked me the question, I would say, you're never going to get me on a motorcycle. But then I came to Rim Country. I saw all these motorcycles, and I saw this beautiful, beautiful scenery. And how great it was to ride. And something kind of just, a spark was lit there. And eventually I had to let go of the story I've been telling myself again and again, that it just was a terrible thing to ride motorcycles. I was never going to do it again. And then that desire, as I focused on it a little bit, began to build. And I got some clarity. I distilled it into, well, maybe. And then the idea of a trike came along, because the two-wheeler was not, I was a little bit shaky about that. And I began to distill that desire. Then, you know that the other way of traveling around here, I love to hike around Payson and the Rim Country area. So in some of those hikes, I began to turn that over in my mind. And I began to see it. I began to see myself on that bike. Just enjoying the scenery. And I began to feel it as well. Began to sense it. Feel the wind flowing past me. And the freedom of the bike. So when I got to that point, then, I'm not sure I looked over my shoulder, but inspiration came to accompany that burgeoning desire. Inspired, I went to ADOT. I got my permit. One start, one bit of action. And not long after that, a training course for trikes in Gilbert, down in the valley, became available to me. I went down and took that training course, got my endorsement. And then I began to set my sights, thanks to Donna for a lot of her enthusiasm along the way, but we began to set our sights on a trike. And we had a pretty good idea of exactly what we wanted. And we looked down the line all over the country to find the trike that we wanted. We tried some that didn't suit us at all. And then we kept that vision alive. Due to that inspiration, guess what happened? That bike appeared 2 blocks from here. And now it sits outside. But it's a mundane example of what can be. It's an everyday life kind of example about what can be. Going through that process all the way from letting go that old movie on to distilling, building that desire, taking that inspiration and acting in the long run. I'm grateful. It's a good thing. But let's go back. Enough of the story. Let's go back to choosing right. When we choose rightly, here are the 5 steps that I'm using. And I encourage you to use them if they are helpful to you. Number 1, let go of thoughts and images that don't serve you. This could be anxieties, worries, concerns, hallucinations, all that stuff, suspicions even. Well, you have the ability in your mind to choose to let go of some of those things, because you'll make room for using your imagination rightly. And you can let those go, because that worry, it's a misuse of your imagination. Secondly, look for your true desire and distill it. You know what it is. What you truly desire is there. Sometimes it's covered over by all the busyness of life, but if you take a moment, your true desire will become apparent to you. Then in the silence, imagine that which you desire with thought, sense, and feeling. Don't miss any of those. Thought, develop that thought. Perhaps that thought takes an image concept. You may draw what it is that you desire. You may find pictures of what it is that you desire. But sense it. Get the physical senses involved in this, and the feeling that will be there as you demonstrate and live that desire. Fourth, hold the image of the desire and look over your shoulder for inspiration. As that desire becomes real and more real, inspiration is going to be there. You're going to find that, gosh, somehow I'm just sort of inclined to do something or to go someplace. And then a circumstance shows up. So hold. And I can't emphasize enough to hold that desire. We quit sometimes when we're 90% there. Hold the desire. And then finally, just act on that inspiration that you receive. So one other quick example I have to say. And Donna helps me. I feedback with her on this message and this concern in my life. Not concern, this opportunity in my life. We thought, gosh, we see Unity of Payson prospering. We see our ranks being swell. We see us being able to be in service to many. And I said, well, how about 4 visitors today? I think that's what we had, isn't it? Or 5. Maybe we surpassed that. Even something as simple as that. If we hold that desire, if we act as we're led, as inspired, it will come to us. So I encourage you this week to take one budding desire. You know one of those desires. And use your imagination to create it rightly. If you want to use that 5-step process, in the rack, I've got a bunch of little slips of paper. Take it with you if you want, and that can be helpful to you. All of those 5 steps. I guarantee you, your imagination is powerful. You've created your life up till now, and you will continue to create it. So create rightly. Take that imagination and tailor it to be who you truly desire to be. And then honestly ask yourself, what's in your imagination? Don't make it bigger. What's in my imagination? As you honestly look at that, then take the opportunity to change, to choose differently, and so to create the life that you desire. And so it is.